Hello, Professor Jeffrey Gulley here, and I wanted to chat with you about jurisdiction of our state and federal courts. So let's begin by actually defining what jurisdiction means and break it down to its bare bones based on its Latin derivation. So the juris means law, diction to speak, jurisdiction, law to speak. It's the power of a court to hear a dispute and to, quote, speak the law into that controversy and render a verdict, render a judgment legally binding upon the parties to that dispute. A court will have jurisdiction when it has this power over the subject matter of the case and over the persons of the plaintiff and defendant or the property that may be in dispute. So jurisdiction is required for any court. When I say court, I'm also talking about a specific judge of that court to enter any type of decision. Without jurisdiction, the actions of a court would be invalid under the law, would be a nullity, in other words. So jurisdiction, very important. We're going to be breaking down the jurisdiction of our state courts and also look at our limited jurisdiction of our federal courts. Also, it's important to understand that states also have specific statutes called, we refer to those as long arm statutes. Courts will use these from time to time for non-resident parties based upon their minimum contacts with the state. It means that the defendant had some connection with the forum state. It could be for individuals or it could be for a business. At the business level, does the business conduct some type of commerce or advertise within the state? Maybe they have a warehouse or distribution point. That would be considered a minimum contact with that particular forum state. So when a plaintiff successfully uses a long-arm statute in a lawsuit, the defendant has to return to the forum state and defend the lawsuit. If the defendant fails to do so and just ignores the lawsuit after being served with the complaint, a default judgment may be granted by the court. A good example of that would be if a person is on a business trip and they're traveling from one state to another state, and while they're in this other state visiting some clients there, they're in an accident. Fender bender, property damage to another vehicle, person possibly has physical injuries as well. So, again, this person who was in the accident is from another state, doesn't reside there. But if the other party to the accident does file a lawsuit for personal injury, then the defendant would have to return to that forum state for purposes of the lawsuit under a long arm statute. Again, every state has a long arm statute, can easily be researched to see what the requirements are in a specific state. State courts. We look at our state courts or federal courts. To distinguish jurisdiction between the two, we have to ask certain questions in order to figure out subject matter jurisdiction. We need to know the location of an incident or the issue involved, the parties involved, the property involved, location. So that's very important. Other questions have to be asked as well. But we start with this. And in the practice of law, this certainly is examined right away by an attorney and a paralegal because it happens in the client interview. A prospective new client comes in, and so many times paralegals will participate in the client interview before the person even meets with an attorney, or sometimes it's the attorney and paralegal together in a meeting with a prospective client. So everything is examined by asking the client, the prospective client, about what happened. If they were involved in an accident, for example, where did it occur? What kind of, were you injured? What kind of damages do you have? So we have to determine that as well. I mean, we have to determine, maybe it's a case involving a breach of contract under state law, or does it involve a specific federal statute to determine which court would have jurisdiction? So jurisdiction is something that definitely will be examined closely when a client is seeking legal representation. And after the initial interview, obviously it's important for attorneys to follow up and conduct an investigation as well to make sure that everything is covered, to make sure that there was nothing left out from the version given by the prospective client. So let's examine state courts. So if the matter is one that's going to be filed in state courts, it could be something involving a crime, something involving a civil matter. How do we determine the jurisdiction of our respective state courts? We will examine our state constitutions and/or our statutes. Some state courts actually were created by a state constitution. Others are created by state statute. Both have jurisdiction over specific types of cases. Most states do have general jurisdiction trial courts. Could be called a circuit court, district court, superior court, a court of common pleas, for example. The names of those courts and their respective jurisdiction will vary among the states. Certainly they do. Some states won't have a superior court. Some states will have circuit and superior. Some states will have circuit district. I mentioned court of common pleas. Some states may have that. So some states have specialized probate courts. Some of the general jurisdiction courts will have concurrent jurisdiction with other courts in that state. For example, let's say a state has both circuit courts and superior courts. Those courts may have concurrent jurisdiction over certain types of civil cases and certain types of criminal cases. In addition to our courts of general jurisdiction, many states will have limited jurisdiction or specialized courts. Could be a small claims, for example, family courts. Also, it's important to note that today in our society, in many jurisdictions, we have problem-solving courts, like drug courts, reentry courts. Those are courts where there is special attention paid to individuals who have been convicted and sentenced to prison time. And as they get close to the end of their prison sentence, they may actually be released from prison early to participate in a reentry court, where they will be supervised by a judge, but they will also be able to access various community resources to help with housing, employment, also other issues like mental health services. Very important resource in many communities. There's also specialized veterans courts in some jurisdictions as well. Because of the limited jurisdiction of our federal courts specified in the Constitution, most all cases, criminal and civil, are heard in our state courts. So let's examine specifically what the Constitution says about our federal courts. We go to Article 3. If you studied and read the Constitution, you know that the Founding Fathers actually wrote a specific article for each branch of government. Article 3 is for the judicial branch. And in Article 3, Section 1 is where our founders created the federal court system. Part of the language quoted there, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. U.S. Constitution, Article 3, Section 1 is where you'll find that specific language. So you see, our founders specifically mentioned the Supreme Court and referred to the other federal courts as inferior courts. So, and they said, as would be created by Congress. So it was Congress who specifically created our various U.S. district courts, which are the trial courts of the U.S. federal court system, and then our intermediate appellate court called the U.S. Court of Appeals. So let's examine how we must determine federal court jurisdiction. Under the Constitution and related statutes passed by Congress, we look at cases that can be filed in U.S. District Court. So, specifically, is it going to be through diversity jurisdiction or via a federal question? So, diversity jurisdiction involves civil cases. Civil cases. So, you can see I've got cited on the slide, U.S. Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1, civil cases between citizens of different states and citizens of a state and citizens of a foreign nation. Those are the types of cases that fall under diversity jurisdiction. In addition to that part, the amount in controversy must exceed $75,000, and that's pursuant to statute enacted by Congress. Cited there, 28 United States Code Annotated, Section 1332. I would note that there is what we call a probate exception. It's not mentioned in the statute nor the Constitution, but rather by a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, where in Marshall v. Marshall, a case decided in 2006, the court said that federal courts lack subject matter jurisdiction to probate wills or to administer decedents' estates. That is a matter for our state courts, and the court examined that and held that in that case of Marshall v. Marshall. Now, I noted on the slide as well that the threshold amount for diversity jurisdiction is set by Congress. Currently, it's at $75,000, and it's been at that level since 1996. History tells us that it has been as low as $3,000 back in 1958. So in addition to diversity jurisdiction, that applies only to civil cases now, not criminal matters. We have jurisdiction based on a federal question. So these are the cases that involve a federal question, any case arising under the U.S. Constitution, a U.S. statute, or any treaty to which the United States is a party. And the authority for that is our Constitution again, and a separate statute now, 28 United States Code Annotated, Section 1331. So matters involving a federal question. For example, someone committing a crime on federal property. The murder of a federal employee would be another example of a federal question. Civil cases that involve a federal question, someone who is going to file a lawsuit based on employment discrimination in the workplace, alleging a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Perfect example of a civil case involving a federal question. So because these are the only two ways that cases can originate in our federal courts, in our federal trial courts, you can see how it's limited jurisdiction and why most cases are filed in our state courts. Most Americans are more likely to have an interaction with our state courts instead of our federal courts. So federal court jurisdiction. Also, I don't include a mention on this specific slide, but our federal courts can have specialized courts as well that are specified by statute set by Congress For example, also mentioned in the Constitution, bankruptcy courts. They're a specialized court of our federal court system. And the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, you'll find a bankruptcy court in every courthouse in every judicial district throughout the United States. Again, within the exclusive province of the federal government. So under state law, based on the Constitution, bankruptcy is exclusive to the federal government. So states may not create bankruptcy laws or bankruptcy courts as a result. All right. Well, with that, that will conclude our little discussion of the jurisdiction of our state and federal courts. Thank you.